shall we start, Judy, with a little singing and anything you'd like to lead us in?
Yeah, great. And thank you, Rabbi, for creating such a community here and the other things that are going on through the day. It's really gives a lot of chizuk, a lot of strength. Thank you so much. So I'm looking at Psalm 121 again, and the words I think were posted. I'll sing, and maybe at the end we'll try again to sing together. But join me, sing along, move your hands, whatever shows that you're kind of engaged with this psalm here too. Ya hai la la hi ai la la hi ai lai lai ai lai 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 ai lai lai lai. It's good if you smile. Ya hai ai 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 ay 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 ya ay ay. You can move your head a little bit. Ya ay 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 ya ay 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 Esa einai el heharim me'ayin me'ayin yavo ezri Esa einai el heharim me'ayin me'ayin yavo ezri Ezri me'im Adonai Ose shamayim ba'aretz Ezri me'im Adonai Ose shamayim ba'aretz. You guys sound great. Can't wait to hear you later.
Thank you so much, Judy. Somebody just asked who wrote this setting. Is this a Carlebach setting?
I think it's Baruch Chait, C-H-A-I-T.
Baruch Chait is the composer, the setting, who wrote the setting. The words themselves are, of course, from Psalm 121. And the Psalms have provided so many of the significant things that we sing and say at different moments. So good morning again to everyone, and hopefully everybody is now muted. And if you, Harold, would you raise your hand just so people can see you? Harold is our co-pilot today. Sasha is not on today. So I thank those who are helping me to teach the class. And what we're gonna start, as we do every morning, is to read the Psalm again in Hebrew and in whatever English translation you have. And I hope that each of you now has an English translation, and it could even be the English translation that you came up with yesterday. Okay, so.
Daniel?
All right, everybody should be muted. So if everybody could mute themselves, if you're not muted, except for me. And we're gonna read it through the Hebrew of these 6 verses. I think we're on our 6th day of working on this Psalm, aren't we? You're getting a sense of what some close reading feels like, and hopefully you're experiencing every day, you're getting deeper into it. Okay, we'll start with the Hebrew. Ashrei ha'ish asher lo halach ba'atzat risha'im u'v'derech chata'im lo amad u'v'moshav leitzim lo yashav. Bet, pasuk bet or verse 2. Ki im b'torat Adonai cheftzo u'v'torato yegeh yomam v'layla. Gimel, verse 3. V'haya ka'et shatul al palgei mayim asher piryo yiten be'ito v'alehu lo yibo v'chol asher ya'aseh yatzliach. Daled, 4. Lo chen ha'risha'im ki im kamotz asher tidfenu ruach. 5. Hey. Al ken lo yakumu risha'im b'mishpat v'chata'im ba'adat tzadikim. Ki 6, verse 6, Vav. Ki yodea Adonai derech tzadikim b'derech risha'im toved. And read whatever English translation or vernacular you have in front of you. Fortunate is the man who has not walked in the counsel of the wicked, and in the way of the sinful he has not stood, and in the seat of the scornful he has not sat. But only in the Torah of Adonai is her desire, and in her Torah she meditates day and night. He will be like a tree set into the ground near streams of water, which yields its fruit in its seasons, and whose leaf does not wither. And in whatever he does, he will succeed. Not so the wicked, who are like the chaff which the wind drives away. Therefore, the wicked will not stand up in judgment, nor the sinful in the assembly of the righteous. For Adonai regards the way of the righteous, and the way of the wicked will be lost. So my first question is, how many different ways in this psalm are wicked people described? How many different ways? So the Hebrew words we have, the first one we have is Rishaim. How many times is the word Rishaim used in the Hebrew? So we have it in the first verse once. And then we have the word Rishaim again in the fourth verse. And then again in the fifth verse. So Rishaim is said 3 times. Is that correct, or is it 4 times? And 4 times, correct. So in a psalm with 6 verses, the word Rishaim is used 4 times. The next word for people who remove holiness from the world rather than increase holiness is the word Chataim. How many times is that used? It's in the first verse. Do we see it again in this psalm? No, I don't see it again, correct? It's only once. Am I correct? Only once?
In 5.
In verse 5. See the, yes, correct. So, okay, excellent. So, chataim you see twice. The next word is leitzim, which is an interesting word. And by the way, it sounds an awful lot like eitz, which is for tree. So it's a contrasting word, right? So leitzim, which means scornful, or people who are cynical, or people who are skeptical. How many times is leitzim used? The Hebrew on my text is so small. We have to get into CBSC to get my reading glasses. That's what we're waiting for. The 14 days are over, and then somebody's going to go into the synagogue so I can get my reading glasses. So how many times are leitzim used? I think once, correct? So once. Now, let's contrast that with how many times the word for tzadikim, which is the word for tzadik, is the same shorish as tzedek, which means justice, or tzedakah, which means the Jewish version of charity or giving things that are right. So tzadikim are the people in the world who increase holiness. So tzadikim is found twice. So again, as I said, in Hebrew, the repetition of a word is not considered bad form as we might see in English. So as we look at translations, let's pay special attention to the different ways our translators have tried to understand the words for negative people as well as the word for positive people, or the words for those who decrease holiness versus the words who increase holiness. Now, in addition to the word for tzadikim, meaning the people who are increasing holiness, what are the other ways that people who are doing increasing of holiness in the world are described in this psalm? So we have the negative version, but we have somebody who cheftzo, who yearns for, and yehegeh, who meditates on the instructions of the Holy One all the time. So that's one description. And then in verse 3, we have a person who lives like that is a person whose roots are so deep like a tree, who's rooted, who has deep roots, who isn't just up in the air and just superficial, but somebody whose roots are deep. So a using of the word tree is a metaphor, is a symbol, is a description of somebody who's living in this powerful way. and their fruit, what they produce, has long-lasting power. Fruit of a tree that has long-lasting power. So that's contrasted then in verse 4, that the Rishaim, those who decrease holiness, they're not rooted deeply, and they're like the chaff of what do you call it? Wheat, which the littlest wind will blow away. Not going to last a long time. Their legacy is superficial, and their impact on the universe will be superficial, even if we don't see that. The point of this is long term. Lo yakumu rishaim b'mishpat. They will not stand. Yakumu, lakum, to stand up. The same kind of, remember, contrasting it with a tree, which stands tall and has deep roots and stands tall. Rishaim will not stand up to mishpat, for judgment, and chataim nor those who are chataim, but adat tzadikim. Okay, so now let's look at some translations to expand our understanding of this. I'm just going to turn on this light to add a little. Okay, so Harold, tell me what to do here. I look at the chat. Is this what we're going to look at? Robert Alter's translation first. Is that in here? Where do I find it? Okay.
Okay, so on the right, everybody can download them to their own computers and take a look, or Scott can post them as a text that we're all looking at together.
Okay, so Scott, can you do that? So we're going to look at Robert Alter, which is 2 pages.
Sure. I'll I just have to open them and then put them into the chat.
Scott.
Yeah.
Everybody, a lot of gratitude to Scott. He's been, like so many of us, is living alone and working really hard, and we're very grateful for Scott for all the work he's doing to help us to be able to communicate, which, as everybody knows, is we have special challenges, so very grateful to Scott. All right, so can everybody look at the Robert Alter?
Yeah.
Does everybody have Robert Alter? By the way, it's this book. If you're interested in owning a fascinating...
If you look on the chat, it says Alter 1 and Alter 2. If you just click it, it should download and open.
If for the purposes of this class, you are interested in buying some books about the Psalms, and we will be using all 3 of these books in addition to whatever basic translation, this is the Robert Alter Book of Psalms, highly recommended. The second book we'll be looking at today, Stephen Mitchell, A Book of Psalms, selected and adapted from the Hebrew. Okay, all right, great. So let's look at this. Thank you, Scott.
What's the third book?
So everybody should be muted except for me now. Thank you, everybody. So this is Robert Alter, who's a scholar, and his book has commentary, which is very interesting. And we'll talk a little bit about him another time. But right now I want to dive into the translation he's using. And he tries to do 2 things. He tries, unlike the following 2 translators we'll look at, he's trying to understand what the biblical Hebrew is trying to say. So he will, in his own way, stay close to the translation, but he'll try to understand, he understands biblical Hebrew very well. He's comparing it to other ancient Near East languages. And instead of saying, what do I think, he's trying to get to the meaning underneath the biblical Hebrew. So it doesn't mean he's right. Again, let me keep repeating this. It doesn't mean he has the right answer. It just means this is his style. And let's think what we can learn about this psalm from Robert Alter. So first of all, let's read out loud verse 1.
So I downloaded this.
Okay, I need everybody to be muted except for me. I apologize.
Am I muted? I hope I am.
No, somebody is now. I can hear you. Should make sure your mute is on.
I am muted.
Now you're muted. Thank you. I know it's weird. Please stand, please sit, please mute. Okay, so verse 1. So first of all, you'll see the 1 to tell us where the verse is on the right-hand side. Happy the man who has not walked in the wicked's counsel, comma, nor in the way of offenders has stood, comma, nor in the session of scoffers has sat, period. So the first thing we always notice in a translation, and again, it's a form of interpretation, is the punctuation the translator is using. And this Robert Alter is trying to get close to the biblical Hebrew. So he is doing exactly what we discussed and what J.B. Sachs pointed out and what Jeffrey Goldberg pointed out. There are 3 phrases in this first verse, and he's very carefully, both by the layout and the punctuation, emphasizing that this verse has 3 important clauses or phrases to notice. So phrase number 1, and now we understand that, right? Now you can look at this with some understanding. I'm hoping that this is becoming a little bit more clear to you, that maybe if you had just looked at Alter last week before we started, you would have said, oh, you would just have read it through. But here's what he's saying. Happy the man. So first of all, he's using the word happy. He's trying to understand. He's not saying is the man, because he's looking at Ashrei Ha'ish as this description, and going to the Hebrew itself, Asher lo halach, who has not walked. He's using quite a literal word, in the wicked's counsel, ba'atzat. So he's translating this word of advice or ideas as counsel. But again, counsel is a form of dibur, of speaking. It's not, right? It's advice. But now notice he's using the word wicked for rishaim. So hold on to that. That's number 1. Number 2, phrase number 2, nor ba'atzat rishaim, uvederech chataim. So he is translating that an opening verb of, opening vav as a disjunctive word, nor. So he's not saying and, uvederech chataim, and he's saying nor in the way. Now my literal translation from this book translates that little vav in the beginning and in the way of the sinful. No, Robert Alter understands that the vav, which we in modern Hebrew translate as and, is not functioning as a conjunctive and, it's functioning as a disjunctive, nor, making a contrast. I hope that's the correct usage. Marcia and Susan will correct me if I'm wrong. Nor in the way of the offenders. Now, interesting, he's using the word offender to translate chataim. Some of our translations have said sinners. And again, he's trying to get to offenders, meaning those who have done wrong, has stood, amad. Again, more concrete than counsel. Karma. Uvimoshav. Again, we have that vav in the beginning of the Hebrew, which in modern Hebrew just means end, A-N-D. But Alter understands each of the second and third phrases are trying to be continuing this phrase, nor in the session of scoffers has sat. So we have walked, stood, and sat as the verb translations. And session, he's using for the word moshav, which is a fascinating translation of that. Lo yoshav, has sat. He has tried to do in this translation, notice we have has stood, has sat. He's tried to reflect or mirror the structure of the sentences and not change them, which we might do if we were rendering this into comfortable English. He's emphasizing these ways of looking at it. Are there any questions or anybody else want to make comments on this first verse only? Maybe, do you all know how to raise your hand in the, I think you all have the ability to raise a hand down there, or no?
Yes, under is it under participants? No. It's under, where is it, Scott? Where do you raise your hand?
Under participants.
Oh, I have a hand. Okay, under participants, you can raise a hand. Or you can unmute just yourself.
Right.
Quick.
Okay, any comments or questions about this first verse and I know what Alter is doing? Okay, what?
I'd like to say that his translation comes the closest I've seen to the poetic sound of the Hebrew.
Yes, this is a very important point. Alter is trying to get at the biblical Hebrew itself. He's not trying to make it into English poetry as much, which we'll see the others will do. He's really trying to understand the biblical Hebrew and trying in the English so that an English reader can get as close to the rhythm of the biblical Hebrew. Excellent point.
If I could just say, Alter has a book on translating biblical Hebrew that's available as a download, which is fascinating. I think it's the introduction to his entire translation of the Bible, but he talks about all these things, word choice and rhythm and alliteration, etc.
So through this class, we will be looking, as I said, at this book, Alter's The Book of Psalms, Stephen Mitchell's A Book of Psalms, and the third one today will be Norman Fisher's. Mitchell and Fisher do not do all of the Psalms. That's one of their weaknesses of their books is that, from my perspective, I wish they would have done what they did with every Psalm, but they did not. So anyway, but it's good for contrasting the ones that they did do. Anything else about verse 1? We have two.
I thought we were on verse 2. I'll wait for verse 2.
No, we're just still on verse 1. Okay.
So we have Jacob, who's raising a hand.
Okay, Jacob. Jacob, we love you. So nice to hear from you.
Good to see you all too from Wisconsin. So I was just noting that point of alliteration seems to be the very intentional use of the word session and scoffers, implying with the Hebrew moshav and yashav, really trying to get that alliterative note there.
Excellent. And again, Alter cares about us English speakers feeling a little bit of that. And the biblical Hebrew, as I pointed out a couple of sessions ago, very much plays with sound. And he's doing this very good. Thank you. We have a couple of other raised hands.
Yeah, we have David.
Oh, hi. I wonder what we think of scoffers. What are they scoffing? And I think Mitchell says heedless. What are they heedless to? The Torah?
Okay, well, let's not get to the other translations yet. We want to really thank you, but
They're
I
scoffing.
think what he's getting at is that the late seam has some sense of being skeptical or being scornful. So I think it's those who are not reverent or so it's a kind of a negative attitude as opposed to somebody who steals something. So it's trying to get it. There are different kinds of ways to remove holiness in the world. It's not all somebody who steals, rapes, and kills. This is somebody whose attitude is a very negative one. Do you know what I mean? So
Bad attitude. Okay.
there's a contrast to an action. I think part of what the psalmist is telling us is that there are different ways to remove holiness from the world, and it's not all the obvious stealing, raping, killing. Those are kind of the easy ones to point to. It's getting to a deeper level of spiritual understanding to see these. And okay, a couple of more points, comments. Scott or Harold, if you could, I can't see the hand raising.
Nothing, we're good.
Okay, all right. So let's look at, and you'll see that Alter here has a comment where I want to read this out loud, okay? I have to take off my glasses. Walked, stood, sat. Remember, we've pointed this out over and over again, the development of the verbs here. It is easy to understand why the ancient editors set this brief, eloquent psalm at the head of the collection. This is Psalm 1 of 150. In content, it is a wisdom psalm, affirming the traditional moral calculus to which Job will powerfully object, that it pays to be good, whereas the wicked will be paid back for their evil. Wisdom literature is an international genre in the ancient Near East. It reflects in an approximately philosophical manner on the uses of human life, and one of its major thrusts is the didactic inculcation of the principles of proper living. It tends to be universal rather than national. in its perspective. In style, this psalm is a lovely instance of the force of familiar imagery favored by the psalmist. Walking on a way is a traditional metaphor for pursuing a set of moral choices in life. In this verse, that idea is turned into an elegant narrative sequence in the triadic line, first walking, then standing, then sitting, with the attachment to the company of evildoers being increasingly more habitual from one verse to the next. Nahum Sarna raises the interesting possibility that the first word of the psalm, happy, Ashrei, may pun on Ashurim, steps, and henceforth reinforce the walking metaphor. So what I referred to in maybe our first session is that the Psalms are generally divided up into big groups, and maybe a different session, I'll spend one whole session on this. And the wisdom Psalms are part of a larger wisdom literature that Alter is referring to. So as I said, some Psalms are Psalms of despair, some are Psalms of gratitude, some are Psalms are historical Psalms, and some are wisdom Psalms, meaning they're sources of wisdom. How do you live a good life? And notably, many wisdom Psalms are very universal, although this does refer, of course, to Adonai, in that these are basic ways of living a good life, but we'll come back to that. So just to know, as a category, this is considered a wisdom Psalm. All right, verse number 2, according to Sarna. But, remember, we talked about but, I just dropped my Hebrew, that at the beginning of the first line in Hebrew is ki, the word ki, that can be translated a million different ways, but the Lord's teaching is his desire, and his teaching he murmurs day and night. And again, Alter's trying to stay close to the biblical Hebrew. Whenever the word Lord is used by Alter and many other translations, by the way, and you'll notice, what do you notice about the way the word is presented here in the font? Notice the word Lord.
It is small caps, which was used first in the King James Version.
Right, so it's small caps whenever the word Lord appears. And that means it's referring to that big name of God, not the other 69 different names of God, and not the more common one or the other common one, Elohim. This, we know that the translation is referring to Yud, He, Vav, He, the Tetragrammaton, the 4-letter name of God. So, but the Lord's teaching is his desire, meaning the his is going back to the man from verse 1. And his teaching, he murmurs day and night. Now, how do we know we've got his, you, and he used here. Capital his means the Lord, and small he is going back to the man in the first verse. Now, he's translating yeh, this meditate, murmur, day and night. So everybody clear with that? We want to move through so I can finish this. Everybody got okay, let's look at verse 3, which is this next page for Alter.
Scott?
Yes, I know. Hold on one second.
Thank you.
Notice the lyre or harp on the top of the page. Anybody know why a lyre or harp Alter puts on the top of each psalm?
David was the harpist.
King David, who is traditionally, as I mentioned earlier, ascribed as the author of all the Psalms, was a harpist. And that's why we know and we think a lot about music that has been saved. Oh, I didn't do such a good job of photocopying this page. Oh, sorry about that. I did this very quickly this morning. I'm trying to figure this out as well. Okay, I will read. If you could try and focus and see it as clearly as you can. Verse 3 of Psalm, I'll read it from the book to make clear. And he shall be like a tree planted by streams of water that bears its fruit in its season, and its leaf does not wither, and in all that he does, he prospers. And again, Alter is with his layout and is that the right word, Marcia and Susan? The way the format of the sentences, he's trying to get to the translation that he believes most closely gets at the biblical Hebrew. So here for the, here he translates the word and and which is v'haya ka'etz, and he shall be. Remember I said this is the vav haipuch, the upside down vav, even though the verb is in the past tense, because it has that vav, it makes it into the future tense, or from the perfect to the imperfect tense. He shall be like what? What is a person who creates holiness, or like a tree planted by streams of water that bears its fruit? And then phrase number 2 is more explanation of what clause number 1 meant. It will bear its fruit in its season. It will be fruitful. It will create a legacy. It will have progeny. It will create things for the future. And its leaf does not wither. Hyphen there. And all he does, he prospers. Now, again, we could see because all the he's are lowercase, it's all going back to the first ish. Verse 4, not so the wicked. The Hebrew was lochen harishaim. Now, you'll notice that he is translating rishaim, which we noticed appears 4 times in this psalm, always as wicked. So we see somebody that rishaim, which appears 4 times in the Hebrew as rishaim, he's consistent. Wherever the word rishaim appears, he uses the word wicked. More about that another day, the word wicked itself. Not so the wicked, comma, but like chaff that the wind drives away. Wow, that's a very powerful contrast to verse number 3. 5, therefore the wicked will not stand up in judgment, nor offenders in the band of the righteous. Righteous is his translation of tzaddikim, because of the closeness of the word tzaddikim to justice, or just, or good, or righteous. 6, for the Lord, small caps, Lord, embraces the way of the righteous. Now we contrast the word righteous and wicked, and the way of the wicked is lost. Okay, any comments about this whole translation? I want to quickly look at, I want to look now at the next one. Let's not do comments so we can look at the next one. Let's look at Stephen Mitchell's translation if we can. And again, this is the book, Stephen Mitchell. If you wanted to get 3 books of interesting translations to contrast, these 3 are good. They're all available. And the third one is Norman Fisher's Opening to You. But looking at the Stephen Mitchell, now, Stephen Mitchell and Norman Fisher are not biblical scholars, nor are they interested in exploring the depth of biblical Hebrew. They're interested in doing what I started doing with you yesterday, which is to experience, how do I make the words of this psalm meaningful to me? Okay, the psalmist meant what he meant or she meant back 2,500 years ago, and it's very important to study the Hebrew and understand that structure. But how would I make this psalm mean? Okay, this is the Norman Fisher. We'll look at this one first since it's on the screen. Norman Fisher is actually, he's born Jewish, but he's also a Zen priest. So he's bringing Zen Buddhism, or a Jubu. He is a
Do you
Jubu.
mean Stephen Mitchell?
No, right now, are we looking at Stephen Mitchell? Or no, this is, right now on the screen you have is Norman Fisher. This is, what you have on the screen right now is Norman Fisher. Happy is the one who walks otherwise. This is Norman Fisher. It's fine. Let's look at this one. Then we'll look at Stephen Mitchell. So let me read this out loud. Now notice, no attempt to format it in a way that is close to the biblical Hebrew. Again, he's asking the question I ask of all of us. How do we make this psalm meaningful for me? How do we say it in words that make it meaningful for me? Happy is the one who walks otherwise than in the manner of the heedless, who stands otherwise than in the way of the twisted, who does not sit in the seat of the scornful, but finds delight in the loveliness of things and lives by that pattern all day and all night. For this one is like a tree planted near a stream that gives forth strong fruit in season and whose leaf doesn't wither and whose branches spread wide. Not so the heedless. They are like the chaff scattered by the wind, endlessly driven. They cannot occupy their place, and so can never be seen or embraced, and they can never be joined. What you see is always lovely and remembered, but the way of heedlessness is oblivion. Wow, so that is really different than the biblical Hebrew, obviously, and very different than altar. And let me just point out a couple of things so that we could then look at Mitchell. So first of all, notice he's removed all references to a gender of the subject. He's not only playing with gender, he's removing gender entirely. He's also he's also oh my God, I just lost the word. He's also not using any references to divinity. He's not talking about God at all. It's very Buddhist in that way, as you can see. And he's also changing the structure. What he's doing is, in the first two paragraphs, or verses, I should say, is the description of who is the person who is contributing to life, to holiness. And then, not so the heedless, that verse in the middle, which is formatted in a way to create disjunction and contrast, he then spends the 1, 2, 3, so that they are like chaff. So the first two paragraphs are describing who is the person who is creating holiness, not so the heedless. Who are the heedless? They are like chaff scattered by the wind. So he continues to use the metaphors and the imagery of the psalm. Endlessly driven, they cannot occupy their place, and so can never be seen or embraced, and they never can be joined. And using heedless as the form of not contributing to holiness is very powerful. It's saying being mindful, being aware, being present is the height of what it means to be holy and to extend holiness. Okay, can we now look at the Stephen Mitchell translation? And his book is called A Book of Psalms Selected and Adapted from the Hebrew. So we're looking at the Stephen Mitchell version. It might be in the chat itself, or I think Scott's trying to share it so we could look at it together. How's everybody doing? Hello, everybody. And I know there are a bunch of comments. We can get through the Stephen Mitchell, so we can, today is comparing these three different, okay. All right, so this is Stephen Mitchell. Blessed are the man and the woman who have grown beyond their greed and have put an end to their hatred and no longer nourish illusions. But they delight in the way things are and keep their hearts open day and night. They are like trees planted near flowing rivers, which bear fruit when they are ready. Their leaves will not fall or wither. Everything they do will succeed. So notice here that we have returned to man and added woman. So there's gender, but trying to be inclusive of man and woman. Obviously not inclusive of non-binary. But like Fisher, Stephen Mitchell has removed direct references to God or Lord, and it's a description of what a human being who is contributing to holiness is. And in there, and what he has done here is add the positive of that first verse. So he's translating greed, looking back at and hatred and illusions are the three translations of Rishaim, Chataim, and Leitzim. And keeping hearts open day and night is Stephen Mitchell's way of understanding, meditating on God's presence. But notice everybody loves this metaphor, this imagery of trees planting near flowing waters. That is, on all of them, a very powerful one. And leaves which do not wither. And of course, what it means to identify success is always a question mark. I want to point out to people that this trees planted near flowing rivers. Does anybody know this song from from political movements? Now I can't think of it. Like a tree that's standing by the water, we shall not be moved. People join together, we shall not be moved. You know that song? Uses this imagery from Psalm 1. That what does it mean to be firmly planted? This imagery of a tree planted by a water. Okay, we have 2 minutes left. So we're going to stop right now so that Judy could lead us in some song. And I'd like you all to spend a little bit more time comparing whatever Hebrew you have and these 3 translations. And tomorrow we'll talk a little bit more about them and maybe anything, what in them you find meaningful, and how you're responding to them.